Good morning again. My name is Gene Martin, and I have the privilege to serve as Executive Director of the New Hampshire Fiscal Policy Institute. NHFPI is a nonpartisan, independent research nonprofit that examines issues related to the state budget, the economy, policy decisions, and the financial security of Granite Staters, centering on topics relevant to low and moderate income people and families. We produce regular reports on New Hampshire's fiscal and economic challenges and strive to serve as a resource to anyone interested in meeting those challenges. NHFPI does not lobby on legislation. Our goal is to provide unbiased data analysis to policymakers, community leaders, journalists, and the general public. One of the many ways that we do this is by convening stakeholders to have thoughtful, data-informed conversations about pressing policy issues. We'll begin with the first installment of our three-part series, Strengthening the Foundations of a Thriving Economy, on the topic of childcare. In 2 weeks from now, on April 29th, we'll focus on health. And the last webinar of the series on May 13th will end by examining poverty and income. You'll next hear from NHFPI's Senior Policy Analyst, Dr. Nicole Heller, who leads our early care and education work. She'll have a short formal presentation to set the stage for our panel discussion. And then after that panel discussion, we'll have about 10 minutes for Q&A. Please submit your questions using the Q&A feature in Zoom. And now it's a joy to welcome my colleague, Dr. Nicole Heller. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Gene, and thank you all for being here today. Happy Monday, happy tax day, happy Marathon Monday. Lots of great stuff happening today. So I want to start us off with the numbers, the current state of childcare in our state. Currently, childcare is unaffordable to most New Hampshire families. So in 2022, these are the most recent data we have from Child Care Aware. Tuition for center-based care for an infant was approximately $15,000 a year. Families with 2 children under the age of 5 paid roughly $28,000 a year. We also know that there are limited childcare spots for the demand that we may need in the state. So for the period between 2018 and 2022, and again, these are the most recent 5-year estimates we have from the U.S. Census Bureau, we had about 53,000 children under the age of 5 in New Hampshire who had both parents or their sole parent in the workforce. At that same stretch of time, we had approximately 45,800 licensed childcare slots, which means there was a shortage of roughly 7,200 childcare slots. Now, a couple caveats with this data. One, not all of those families may want childcare and need childcare. They may stagger their work schedules so that one parent goes to work and the other one comes home and takes care of the child, or they might have family or friends who can take care of their children. On the other side, however, we also know that not all of our childcare providers in the state are currently running at their full licensed capacity due to the childcare workforce shortage. So in that same vein, we know that our childcare workers are not making livable wages, and many don't have benefits. So our typical New Hampshire childcare worker earned roughly $32,500 in 2023. And for context, the federal poverty guideline for a family of 4 in 2023 was $30,000. And then finally, it seems like someone should be making money in this process, but they're not. In 2021, the U.S. Department of the Treasury reported that profit margins for childcare providers were usually less than 1%. And so I have a couple more slides to get into that dive into these pieces more deeply before we get into our discussion with our panelists. So I wanted to start with the price of childcare. Now, according to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, affordable childcare is defined as no more than 7% of a household's income. Now, when we look at breakdowns for New Hampshire families, we see that a married couple family who as a median income will make about $145,000 a year would put the equivalent of 20% of their household income toward childcare tuition. And so this family is not eligible under the expanded childcare scholarship program, but they're still would be putting $1 of every $5 toward childcare. Single parent householders have an even tighter budget when it comes to childcare tuition. Without the scholarship subsidizing childcare, a single male householder in New Hampshire would put equivalent of 41% of their income toward childcare tuition, while a single female householder would put approximately 61% toward the childcare tuition. Now, the median household incomes for male and female single householders does fall into the expanded scholarship eligibility. So when we talk about scholarships, we can see that the percentage of children receiving the scholarships as a function of the number of children birthed to age 14 in the state has gone down. So in our green bars here, these are the number of children in New Hampshire receiving scholarships. And we can see that those have gone down over time. And this wasn't surprising. We know that our demographic for this age group is also reducing within the state. What is surprising is that we would expect the percentage of children receiving scholarship to maintain consistency over time. So if that was the case, this thin blue line here would go across and be at like 2.5 or 2% or 3%, but it doesn't. It continues to decrease. So we know that the scholarship may be underutilized. So recently, as of January 1, the expanded eligibility for scholarship was rolled out. This means that for a family of 3, which could be 2 working parents and 1 child, or 1 working parent and 2 children, with an income of about $89,000 or less annually, is eligible for the New Hampshire Child Care Scholarship. If they are earning less than approximately $25,000 a year, they will not have a cost share. If they're making a little over $34,000 a year, they're going to have $5 a week. And for everyone else who qualifies, they'll be paying no more than 7% of their household income toward their cost share. So matching that DHHS definition of affordability. I also wanted to briefly note the limited supply of childcare. So if we look at the limitations by county, we have 7 of New Hampshire's 10 counties having a potential shortage of childcare slots. And this is calculated by taking the number of children in each county who have both parents or a single parent in the workforce and dividing it by the number of providers within that county. And so we can see here, for example, Coos County, each provider would need an additional 35 childcare slots to meet the potential demand. Importantly, this is not just a rural challenge. We also see this in our more populated counties as well. So it's something that's really affecting the entire state. The solutions to address these challenges in different parts of the state may look different, but the challenge is widespread. I also want to speak for a moment about our child care workers. Their salaries and wages currently are not competitive compared to other professions within the state. So in blue, I have our child care workers and preschool teachers. And you can see here the wage for the median wage for child care workers is $15.62 an hour. So the median is the middle. That means half of folks are going to make more than $15.62 an hour, but the other half actually make less. And so our child care workers fall between our fast food workers and our retail sales folks. And our preschool teachers fall between the retail salespersons and all of the New Hampshire occupations. And then I also added the salary of our kindergarten teachers. Now, the Bureau of Labor Statistics does not provide wages for kindergarten teachers. We are only able to get the salary, but it's about $64,000 a year. So when you compare that to our child care workers, our kindergarten teachers make about double what they make. We also have some recent employment projections from the New Hampshire Employment Security. These are the rates of projected turnover each year from 2023 to 2025. So what we're seeing here is that child care workers in our state have about 17% turnover. And by that, I mean they either leave the child care occupation or they leave the workforce entirely. Preschool teachers are a bit more in line with the all occupations in the state at about 11% turnover, and our administrators are lower at 7%. But you can imagine how disruptive it is when a center loses, or a family care provider needs to replace their administrators. Be disruptive. But in general, we're looking at, for every 10 workers within the child care provider, they need to replace 1 to 2 teachers every year. So you can imagine what that's like to do the onboarding and training of that many folks every year. The one conversation we'll be having today is thinking about additional investments. And part of that is to address what's called the true quality of care, true cost of care. And in this case, we're talking about high quality care. So the fact is that revenue for tuition and New Hampshire child care scholarships may not generate enough funds to cover the necessary program costs for our providers. So costs include some of the things you don't think about with a small business, like payroll and benefits, rent and mortgage, insurance and utilities. But child care providers also need to offer professional development for their staff, and that includes time outside of the classroom to cater their curriculums to the kids in their classes. It also means an enriching environment through toys and furniture and playground equipment. So the model works differently than other small businesses, so much so that it's difficult to streamline or consolidate these childcare costs due to the unique business model. So cost savings isn't as simple as just putting 2 classrooms together. It's just not possible to do that. So as we think about investments going forward, we have to think about, over the past 4 years since the COVID-19 pandemic, the state of New Hampshire has received a tremendous amount of one-time funds, both from federal government as well as our state government. And those funds run out in the fiscal year 2025, which is actually this upcoming fall of the calendar year. And once that funding is distributed, we're back to our regular rates of federal and state funding. So we know that these funds have stabilized the industry, and now that's ending. So there is the possibility that the industry becomes destabilized. So before I turn it over to our moderator, I just want to make the key points that the system does not seem to be working well for anyone. Childcare is unaffordable to our families. Our childcare workers are getting low wages and have poor retention as a result. Program revenue doesn't cover the true cost of care, and our providers have small, if any, profits. And then there's end of one-time funding for the sector. So I have a couple resources here. These slides will be posted, but I do want to turn it over now to our moderator. It is my genuine pleasure to introduce Dr. Sara Vecchiotti, Executive Director of the Couch Family Foundation. Dr. Vecchiotti previously worked at the Foundation for Child Development in New York since 2015, where she served as their vice president. She has decades of policy experience in the early childhood care and education space, and will be sharing with us a few remarks before we begin our panel discussion. Sara, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Nicole. Your slides really do show how complex this issue is and how it really takes an intentional, multi-pronged policy approach to make sure that childcare systems are working for children, for their families, for the workers who are providing education and care, and for overall Granite State businesses. And whenever we talk about childcare, preschool, or early care and education policy, I often have to remind myself that it's really not just about the adults, it's also about young children too. And really, the early years are such an important, crucial period of development for children. It's a foundational time that can really set up children to meet their full potential. And the brain research has really revealed that children are rapidly developing their physical, cognitive, and social emotional skills as they're infants, toddlers, and preschoolers, and that such learning and development doesn't really occur in isolation. Children's skills and capacities are intertwined, and they're also occurring in a context of healthy, and in how healthy and enriched their experiences and relationships are. So this is why early care and education is so important, as it really is a window of opportunity to make a huge difference for both child and family well-being. And the research does demonstrate that early care and education, such as high quality childcare, Head Start, and public preschool, can enhance the development of all children, but also particularly for children that are within families with low income. And children make immediate gains in academic skills, executive functioning, and social skills immediately in experiencing early care and education, but they also develop really competencies and skills for future school and life success. So as a result, high quality early care and education serves not just as a work support for parents and caregivers that helps to undergird the greater economy, but also it does in fact have positive impacts and can shape the trajectory of children's development from early childhood to adulthood. And various cost-benefit analysis of early care and education programs have found that investing in high-quality early care and education has a return on investment between 7 and 13%. But key to these returns is really the fact that it's about quality programming. So to realize both the child and the societal benefits, you have to invest in high quality. And equally important is having a well-prepared, supported, and well-compensated early care and education workforce that's interacting positively with children and creating learning environments that are both stimulating and responsive. And having a well-prepared, supported, and compensated workforce is not just important to the quality of programming, but also to the well-being of the early care and education workforce itself. So early care and education experiences for young children capitalize on this ideal window of opportunity to set up children, families, and also businesses with success from the start. And while I'm talking about early care and education policy, it really is more than just a policy issue. For many, it is an issue that affects their daily lives. And so that's why this panel is so important, to hear from those directly impacted by the issue, to fully understand what the issues are and what we can do better. So I'm so pleased to have Matthew Thorne and Shannon Tremblay here to talk about their experiences and hear from them, their perspectives and thoughts. So enough from me. Let's start with some questions for Matt and Shannon. Terrific. Welcome, Matt and Shannon. So Matt, I'm going to start off with a question for you first. Could you share with us your family's childcare needs and what you were looking for in a childcare provider?
Sure. Thanks, Sarah. So yeah, Matt Thorne, dad of 3 kids. We got a girl about to turn 5 and a 3-year-old boy, and then a 5-month-old little girl. So yeah, we're right in the thick of it. And the experience, I guess the first thing to say is we feel really lucky. Lucky to have healthy kids, and that I have a loving partner, and that we're floating somewhere in the middle class. And, I was raised by a single mom, so I kind of know how fragile the home systems are. And if you have a kid with health issues or are single parenting or are poor, like this is a different conversation. So to start off, we feel really lucky. But that said, the stress of just trying to do 2 basic things in life is work and keep your job and raise little kids it's a lot. It really, the kind of daily stress of trying to make that equation work, just kind of shows what a flop this system is. It's like a little bit like a dog chasing its own tail. Kids cost money, so you can't afford not to work. So you start the week just trying to get yourself to work. But then with a lot of the struggles that daycares are going through and being closed a lot and kind of rotating teachers, there just ends up being a real kind of struggle to make all the ends meet. So yeah, it's an interesting journey. I think anyone with little kids right now that's trying to work understands how kind of wild the wait list scene is when you're trying to just even start to get into a daycare. So that's kind of its own experience. We, laugh now, but are still on the wait list for some daycares that we tried to sign our 5-year-old up for, 4.5 years later. And there was an experience that, is just kind of wild to think about. At one daycare, I remember it was kind of so competitive that there were parents that would camp out in their car for 12 hours, waiting till they kind of open the gates to start enrollment. So it's just that little bit of a scene where, trying to kind of get your basics covered ends up being like kind of a real dogfight.
Thank you, Matt, for sharing. And you mentioned wait lists. Shannon, can you explain a little bit why the wait lists are so long?
Staffing is number one. Trying to recruit and retain staff that is just, it's unheard of right now. There's just no one coming into the field. A few years ago, they did away with the career and technical ed programs in high schools, and that was our pipeline. That was where we received, I say we as an industry, but we got our staff from there. And now that those pipelines are broken, no one wants to come in for a low wage. No one wants to come in making $15 an hour, working long hours, and in a stressful environment. So it's definitely staffing. Providers want wait lists, but we want wait lists because classrooms are full, not because classrooms are running at half capacity, which is the case now.
So Shannon, you mentioned several concerns in your response, and I'm just curious, what are some additional concerns that you feel that providers and programs have in their ability to continue to provide care for young children and families?
Yeah, I mean, providers are running at, we're one step away or one sick call away from having to close classrooms. And it's just, they're burnt out. Directors are in classrooms, there's no resources. Schools have speech and OT at their fingertips, and we don't have that. Our providers are the case manager, the cook, the plumber, it's everything. So no one comes into the field wanting to just go to work and make ends meet. They want to provide that high quality care, and right now it's just they can't do it. They're just so burnt out.
What do you feel are some of the challenges leading to the recruitment and retention issues, Shannon?
I think a lot of it, like what I said, the CTE programs, and wages. I mean, it all comes down to wages. If providers can't provide for their own families, how can they provide for other people's families? A lot of providers are subsidized by their partner or their spouse. And then if they're a single family or a single parent, they're on state subsidies as well as, just trying to survive. They're trying to pay their own rent and get their own groceries while they're watching, families struggle to provide childcare.
And in Nicole's slides, we saw that slide about the one-time federal funding. Can you tell us, how did programs and providers use that funding?
The funding, no one's going to say no to funding that's coming through. And that allowed providers, the emergency funding allowed providers to keep their doors open. But it's just not sustainable. Nicole's slide showed just the amount that goes into childcare. The business model itself doesn't work. And it shouldn't come down to the parents having to, have childcare cost so much in order to make ends meet. So
And do you think that the amount and level and timing of funding was enough to really address the underlying concerns and challenges in the childcare system?
No, we definitely need more state funding. It needs to come down to states investing some more funding, and the federal funding has been nice, but it's just like I said, you know, they're just providers are trying to make ends meet, and the model just doesn't work.
Yeah, thank you, Shannon. It's really interesting because a lot of these concerns existed even before the pandemic. And so it's not a new issue for childcare. I think the COVID pandemic exacerbated a lot of issues that were present before. But what's been there as a persistent challenge as well is the cost of care. So Matt, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how your family is managing the cost of childcare and what perhaps trade-offs or changes that your family has had to make in order to afford childcare.
Sure. Yeah, there's a couple different buckets I think about this in, and one is maybe a little outside the scope of this talk, but it really does start at the period of taking leave. And so that is, you know, when had a kid in the last while, that, you know, the leave program that your company has is like, it's everything. So that's kind of where this kicks off, is the challenge of trying to, you know, take care of a newborn with, you know, kind of this hodgepodge of different paid or unpaid leave, or no leave, or, you know, you string together just a week or two of sick leave. So that's kind of where it kicks off. But then into the daycare realm, yeah, it's actually wild. So I just did a little math, and yeah, so I'm happy to share, you know, for two kids, we have two kids in care, and then one we kind of juggle, you know, throughout the day, throughout the workday, kind of pass the baby through our different meetings. We're kind of fortunate to mostly work from home, at least part of the week. But for the two kids in daycare, you know, it's over $600 a week. So if you kind of think through that, you know, it's more than housing, it's more than really any other cost. So yeah, $600 per week, like that number is, it's still, I try not to look at it when it comes through, but it is a lot. And again, it's just how Shannon spoke to it being a broken model. Like most working parents are trying to do is like get to work and like have their kids, you know, have some good care while they're at work. And so it's kind of like a staggering thing to fork over. And I guess the other piece that comes out of that is, you know, you can like get creative and try to make things work and kind of tread water financially for a little while, until you can get into public school. If there's no public preschool, like, you know, for us, there's not, or there's like this lottery system, but it's like kind of hard to get in. Is that you end up in a little bit of this sandwich generation experience, and not everyone experiences this, but, you know, if you're trying to take care of other family members or aging parents, or anyone in your family is sick, and you're also trying to kind of provide for them, you just end up in this real squeeze. So, you know, not having a strong like support from the state to try to like just work and get some help for your kids, it just puts you in a pinch on all the other different fronts. So yeah, we've kind of gone through a lot of different iterations of like dropping our hours or shifting our schedules, and kind of thought about leaving the state. If, you know, if we did leave New Hampshire, that'd probably be the first reason, is try to find somewhere with a little bit better support for, you know, our kids. So yeah, you kind of just end up in this scrappy game of trying to make it work until you can, you know, get your kids into public school.
Yeah, I think you're pointing out really a continuum of services needed, right? From leave to early care and education to then also as the sandwich generation. So appreciate you sharing your thoughts. And you mentioned the broken model, and Shannon, can you talk a little bit about, you know, really what is the childcare business model, and why, even though costs to parents are so high and teachers are so low, can you talk a bit about the current business model?
Yeah, Nicole in her slides kind of overviewed it a little bit, but it's down to everything. I mean, it's down to the equipment and the toys and the diapers and the food provided. You know, all of that has costs incurred that can't be put on the backs of parents. And the high cost of rent and insurance. I mean, we're seeing lots of providers have insurance issues currently. Insurance rates are going up, which, you know, also makes the providers' rates have to go up. It has to be paid for somehow. You know, all the investments that have come through with the ARPA funding have been long-term investments. So, you know, they've been good investments in that hopefully someday we'll be able to get there, but right now providers need money in their pockets. You know, they need money to be able to pay their staff. They need money to be able to pay their rent. They don't necessarily, you know, need investments in tuition assistance. Although it's nice, it just doesn't give them that funding right now. And they're really, really struggling.
Can you also talk a little bit? We have childcare and teacher ratios generally for promoting health and safety of kids. How does that also play in terms of the staffing needed and the amount of staffing needed as well? Is that part of the business model too?
Absolutely. I mean, you know, our ratios in New Hampshire it's a 4-to-1 ratio for infants. So we have to have, you know, tons of staff in the building in order to meet those ratios, which then again, then you have the salaries of those staff. So it's, you know, it's just really not a workable model. And we want high quality, we want low class sizes, but we can't get there.
And can you talk a little bit about, you know, what are the struggles that New Hampshire providers are currently facing, you know, especially when it comes to recruiting staff?
Right. Burnout, you know, people are coming into the industry and they're thinking, oh, we're just going to go and we're going to play with some babies and have some fun. And, but it's a lot more than that. I mean, you know, we're dealing with parents, and sorry, Matt, parents are wonderful, but we see parents twice a day. You know, we see them at drop off, we see them at pickup, and parents, you know, I mean, it's their babies. Of course, they're going to be, you know, wanting the best care, and the teachers do too, but that also adds another layer of stress. And then when you have you're one sick call away from having to close a classroom. And then, you know, if you have a co-teacher and your co-teacher calls out, then you have all those kiddos on your plate for the day. And then, you know, it's just a lot of stress, a lot of worry. You know, they're also then worried about their own families and trying to go home and care for them. So it's a whole lot on their shoulders.
And just going back to some of the slides that Nicole had, the struggle also, I think, might be showing up in the turnover rates. And so I'm looking for maybe Matt and Shannon, if you could talk a little bit about like what's the impact of staff turnover. And Matt, can you talk about it from your perspective?
Sure. Yeah, and I really feel what Shannon is saying on the kind of stress that these facilities feel. Like we see it, and we you know, like you were saying earlier, Sarah, you know, kids are really impressionable, like 0 to 5 or 0 to 6. Like this is the time they're absorbing everything. And for them to kind of absorb that, the whole like just getting to school and having, you know, teacher turnover a lot, and the ire from parents when daycare closes for the day or something doesn't go right, you know, that's all kind of absorbed by the kids. And that's, I think, why we're all kind of upset about this, is because it's not really a time you want to mess around with. Like these kids need a pretty harmonious experience because life's already crazy enough. There's already enough adversity in life. So just to have some basic care is like it's a weird place for us to be in such strife. And, and we feel so much for our daycare facility. They're, like Shannon said, the money and the wages is tough, and they're just under a lot of pressure all the time. And then there's just unexplained things that happen, like pandemics or winter storms, freeze up the power lines. There's just so many uncontrolled factors. So we really feel for them. Our kids love their teachers. They're like such an important part of their life. They're like, part of our network. Like, we're raising them all together in a sense. So it's really vital that they get to grow with teachers for at least a period of time. And so that's a real struggle, when the kids are having different teachers, pretty regularly, and it just like disrupts these bonds, and they act little kids, they can struggle with some of that change, and it just kind of rocks their world, which occasionally is fine. But if it's pretty constantly, it's a tough thing, especially when you're paying so much money to have the care. So we can totally feel how it's putting kind of every person in this orbit in a pinched kind of mentality. And so that's, I think the premise of this webinar is like, we need different policy. We need a different model or some help from the state or something, because everyone's trying their best and hustling, but it's a painful scene.
Shannon, what are your thoughts too?
I echo what Matt was saying. We need the policy change. We need wages to increase. We need compensation for providers. And, we just need to invest in our kiddos. It's like Matt said, it's the most critical time. And if we invest in our kiddos now while they're young, we will have these long-term investments, and we won't have to invest so much in special education and mental health. All of those can be addressed, or at least red flagged, when they're young, rather than when they're older and the time has kind of gone by.
Yeah, I think you're both hitting on the idea that continuity of care for children rests on the relationships, right, that children are forming with their teachers and their early educators, and how important stability is in that perspective. And I'm also thinking about the whole context of a center or a family childcare home, and the teachers are there, but there's also directors. And so, Shannon, could you talk a little bit about what you feel like the experiences of the directors who are, responsible for both the operations and the instruction that's happening in the site? How are they doing?
Oh, the poor directors. Being a director myself, although I'm not in that position right now, it's just that burden. You want to be providing these high quality early education, but you're also pulled in many, many different directions. Like I said before, they're the cook. Where there's many Zoom calls that I'm on with directors where we see them in the classroom, we see them in the kitchen cooking, we see them on the playground as they're talking on their Zoom calls. They're just, I can't reiterate it enough. It's just the burnout. It's, and then toppled with that, it's like, the one sick call away. I remember being woken up in the morning, and your phone rings and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know if I can handle this today. I don't have enough staff, and staff can't even take vacation. We can't even offer them vacation days off because we need to have them in the classroom. So it's just long days, and lots of stress.
And do you feel that there are differences, whether you're a center or a family childcare home?
Yeah, I think the centers, obviously you get the centers and they have a lot more kiddos. So there's a lot more, there's just a lot more stress there. You have staff. And then the family-based providers, that's their livelihood. You know, they've put everything on the line. They most likely they have their house on the line. They have, you know, their own families. And that's stressful in itself. That's they don't, if they have to close, what are they going to do? You know, other providers can go to different centers, but that's, you know, they've really put their whole life behind those centers.
Yeah, I really appreciate both your comments and perspective on what's happening with the system. And it strikes me as really, Nicole, if you could join, perfect. Yay. Hi, Nicole. Welcome back. They're really expressing how fragile this early care and education system and infrastructure really is. Could you talk about a little bit about maybe what are some of the possibilities to reinforce and actually solve some of these complex issues?
So if we're thinking about some of the pieces from other states, it's a lot of investment, whether it's federal investment, state investment, investment from local businesses to support their own workforce. That's what's needed to allow providers to be able to fund for the true cost of high quality childcare, to make sure families aren't spending 20% or 50% of their household incomes to put their children in childcare so that they can work, to make sure that our childcare workers and directors and teachers are making livable professional wages for the skill sets that they have. What we don't want to see is that tuition goes up even more. We don't want to see wages come down for the workforce. And we certainly don't want to see our providers close, because that becomes this really terrible cycle of, well, this provider closed, so now there's even more of a shortage, and now we're going to see tuition possibly go up higher, which is just not sustainable for the states. These are really getting creative, thinking about what other states are doing to be able to address these challenges in New Hampshire so we can raise our children to be healthy and also grow our economy.
Yes, so I'm hearing investment in high quality early care and education, and I'm curious what that means to everybody. So, Matt, could you talk a little bit about what you feel high quality is?
I think that the access piece is almost comes right before the quality question, is just having a facility. You know, we live in a rural spot, so being able to have a facility that's, you know, in a reasonable commute is kind of where it starts. And then, you know, I think the quality piece, we've already touched on the continuity of the of care, or the kind of longevity of teachers to be able to stick with kids and build that relationship over time, and, you know, and teach them a thing or two. And I think that the kind of resilience of a childcare center is another piece, which we've also talked about, being able to not be one sick call away from closing. So to have a little bit of durability in the kind of teacher pool, or like the other ways to kind of handle that, feels really key. And then there's so many things that I think the teachers would love to do, but are, you know, a little bit strapped, like haven't taken vacation or not as supported as they could be. So I'm sure there's so many kind of creative, you know, activities and like different kind of a blend of things to fill the day with the kids that they would love to see, but you can kind of get the feeling that they're really doing their best, but just not able to like fully go for what they'd like to do with their time with the kids, you know, because things are kind of, like we've said, a little bit strapped, always a little bit behind, and the cost thing is so tough on these daycare centers.
And Shannon, what does high quality early care and education mean to you?
It's definitely comes down to that continuity of care, and having providers, the recruitment and retention of providers, having you know, having them be willing and able and laughing and coming in and being all happy to be there. Just, it can't happen unless they have wages. I mean, I think all of this talk comes down to childcare wages. How can we get their wages and their benefits to increase to a point where they can come off of state subsidy, or they can invest in their own families, and be safe to know that they have, a house to go to, or a car to get to work. It's the little things, the behind the scenes, I guess, of childcare that it comes down to.
Yeah, so definitely high quality is speaking to the relationships between the teacher and the children, and the quality of the stimulating learning environment, and which enables kids, right, to learn both like these concrete skills of reading and math, but also the social emotional aspect as well, right? So I heard kind of all of that in your responses to high quality. And so then the next real question is, what types of public support do you feel like we need in order to be able to kind of ease the financial burden all across for parents and providers, but also to enable like the provision of high quality early care and education? So this is actually to all of you. I feel bad. I always ask Matt to go first. So Nicole, I'm going to ask you to go first this time.
Sure. So I had hinted a little bit at looking at what some other states are doing to address some of these challenges. Since these are national challenges that we're seeing, New Hampshire is not necessarily unique in this situation. So we know that in Kentucky, all of their childcare workers, if they work more than 20 hours or more a week in a childcare setting, have access to Kentucky's version of their scholarship program. So like our scholarship program, they have access to that to subsidize their own childcare so that they can be in the childcare workforce. Because based on ratios in New Hampshire, we're going to see one childcare worker can care for 6 to 7 children. So maybe 6 or 7 families that are then able to engage in qualified activities because they have childcare. In Maine, our friends somewhat to the north to us, as well as in Washington, D.C., these states are putting general funds toward their childcare workforce. In Washington, D.C., a provider, depending on their staff position and the hours they work, they can receive up to $14,000 a year to subsidize their income. In Maine, the state legislator there put $12 million toward direct stipends to their workforce. And then as another example, New Mexico took a comprehensive approach. They have free childcare for any families that are at or below 400% of the federal poverty guidelines. They have $10 million in grants that are going toward providers who are going to open up in any designated childcare deserts. And they have for their workforce a $2,000 stipends every semester for any students who are pursuing careers in the early childhood education sector. And so they're taking this multi-pronged approach to try to support their childcare infrastructure within the state.
And Shannon, any public policy recommendations?
I think getting, the business investment into childcare is a great start. I mean, we've kind of been subsidizing the businesses as childcare providers. So it's time that they start investing in us. And also, I love the idea of obviously one-time grants and monies coming in. I think New Hampshire is unique because we are kind of that border state of other states are doing so much for their providers. Maine, as Nicole hinted on, in Massachusetts, and we're a car ride, a short car ride away from a lot of these states. So we're losing a lot of providers to other states. Which is really, really making things, a whole lot harder because we are that border state and we're so small that you can get anywhere.
And Matt, what about you? What are your thoughts?
Let's just do that New Mexico thing. That sounds good. let's just get it done. We've spent some time railing on different, pieces that are frustrating and are challenges, but I also flip it and think about like the positive benefits that could happen if we just had a really good supported system. And like I know the productivity at work would be much better. And New Hampshire has tons of workforce problems. It's hard to get people hired up here. So it could just like be really positive for the workforce, and obviously for the kids and their development, and starting off kindergarten with a bang, kind of like hitting the ground running if the kids are on their way. So it could just be a really great story if we can kind of flip this thing, and just be a kind of pro working families. Like we need some help here. Like it's not working. So you want people to work, and you want to have kids for a tax base, like you got to do something. This is a mess.
Great. Well, thank you all for sharing your thoughts and perspectives on the panel. So this completes the prepared questions, and now we're going to switch to the audience questions. And I just want to flip the script, Matt. That was terrific. I think we should have that as a campaign slogan going forward. So our first question is really, I think it's directed towards Nicole, and it's kind of referencing that actually New Hampshire has made some real positive changes in increasing eligibility for families and changing some of the reimbursement rates. But Nicole, can you talk a little bit, has there been an increase in the childcare scholarship usage since the expansion in January of 2024? And how do we know how many families in New Hampshire will now be able to be eligible for the state scholarship model, and how many are enrolled as of yet?
So it's still a little bit early to definitively say there are any trends. It takes a month or so out to get those numbers calculated. But I have some tentative numbers based on Department of Health and Human Services that they submit notes to the fiscal committees. And so still about an increase of 100 children enrolled in scholarships so far, but again, it's very early, and my science hat on, I'm very tentative about suggesting there's a trend just yet, but it's potentially hopeful. And in terms of determining how many families can enroll, that gets a bit trickier because there's different qualifications depending on if folks are in the labor force, or there's other options, like if someone is in treatment for mental health or substance use disorder, or they are doing job training. Those folks aren't as easily captured in some of the census data. So it's harder for us to be able to definitively say this is the number of families that are definitely going to be able to take advantage of the scholarship program. So some of it is testing out, seeing how this goes for the first year, and being able to speak to it once we kind of step back and say, okay, here's what the trends that we were able to see 6 months, 9 months, 12 months out.
Great, thank you. And then we have a question here for Shannon. The financing of childcare is pretty complex, and so folks are a little bit curious about, in your opinion, what's the most pressing problem to prioritize for solutions? Is it family affordability, childcare compensation, qualifications? I leave it to you. What's the most pressing priority? Facilities? What's the pressing priority, Shannon? What would you start with first?
All of the above. Yes. It's so hard. Everything falls into, different buckets, and we're trying to pull from all those different buckets. So it's so complex. Childcare is its own little, its own little like demon, it's its own little world. There's no other business that is like childcare. You go to a fast food restaurant, and yes, they've increased their prices, and we don't even think of it, in childcare. If we increase our prices, then we have families knocking down the doors. And it just can't be that way. It can't rest on the shoulders of parents, which it is right now. And it's scary to think.
Okay, so the answer is we got to prioritize it all, right?
Yes, just yeah.
All right. All right. Reflecting true costs of high quality care. Nicole, we have another question for you. It's really about, Matt referenced in his response that it's $600 a week for him as an expense for childcare. And so the question is, what would parents spend money on if childcare costs were reduced? Would go to housing, goods, services in the local economy in terms of savings and elsewhere?
It really depends on the family's needs. So for some families, that might mean it goes to their housing. Maybe they can save up enough to buy a house in the competitive market. That's a whole nother webinar that we would need to have to talk about that in and of itself. But it could also be something that families put toward their own retirement. So as the state ages, we know we need to be able to support ourselves. And for I say weeks, I have a 5-year-old in childcare as well. Shout out to Miss Kitty and Miss Jill in Manchester. And so we're thinking about, what can we put away for ourselves as we age? Can we save if our children may go to college? Can we put away for that? And then also, as you mentioned, Sarah, going into the local economy. So as working parents, it's always a treat to be able to just get takeout so you don't have to cook. So it could go to a local business. School vacations going up. So I know a lot of the attractions in the areas are staying open for school vacation week. That would generate income for our economy as well. So it would be, again, dependent on the family and what their needs are, but there are different places that it would go that would benefit both the citizens of New Hampshire and the state as a whole.
Great. So I'm just curious, Jean, I see you have popped up. Do we have time for, or have we reached the limits of our webinar time frame?
You can do one more question.
One more question. Okay, terrific. So let me go to the Google Sheet. Let's see. So Shannon, this question is for you. Earlier you mentioned the waitlist issue and workforce availability. Even if all classrooms were open and operating at full capacity, is there enough physical infrastructure to support the childcare demand?
Absolutely. I mean, we have, closed classrooms right now that are all over the state. We definitely have the capacity to have more children, but we just don't have the staff to get those kiddos in. It's not a matter of needing to build more childcare centers in order to fix the need. It's a matter of filling those classrooms and getting the centers fully enrolled. I mean, we need to be fully enrolled again. We haven't been fully enrolled for a long time. So it needs to happen.
Great. Well, thank you all for sharing your thoughts and perspectives today. I really appreciate you sharing. Jean. Jean, you're...
Here we go. And so I just wanted to say thank you to Nicole, Sarah, Shannon, Matt, for your thoughts and insights on one of the most critical issues facing our state. And a special thank you to our entire team at NHFPI who worked to help make this event go flawlessly. So I want to thank everyone for being here today.